There is no denying that Mazda has been killing it in recent years. And today we're looking at their largest and most expensive SUV available with this, the 2021 Mazda CX-9. And it is a 3-row, full-size SUV with tons of luxury features. And I'm going to give you a full tour around it. But first, I want to make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. Alright, so now we're behind the wheel of the 2021 Mazda CX-9. And spoiler alert, this is one of my favorite SUVs currently available for sale. But first, let's start by understanding where the CX-9 falls in Mazda's lineup. So at the very bottom end, we have the CX-3 and the CX-30. Those are the small ones. We reviewed the CX-30 a couple of weeks ago. Those are the small entry-level crossover SUVs. From there, we've got the CX-5, which is a sort of mid-sized one. Also fantastic, love the CX-5. And then now we're at the range-topping CX-9. The exact CX-9 we're driving is a signature trim, which is the top trim level. You get all-wheel drive, you get all the luxury goodies. This is a fully loaded one. And as tested, we're talking about $48,000. So you get a fully loaded SUV for less than 50 grand, and it's big, 3 rows of space. It's great. But let's get into it. So let's start with the styling, because that's something I feel the CX-9 does beautifully, and largely because it manages to look much more expensive than it actually is. Now, while some competitors at the same price point definitely look like non-luxury SUVs, if this didn't have a Mazda badge in the front, you could easily confuse this for a luxury SUV. Now, the CX-9 can achieve this thanks to its sleek design. Nothing here is in your face, nothing is sort of chromy or trying to jump at you. It's very sleek, it's very elegant, and it works beautifully. Up front, we have the sort of signature Mazda grille, except it's very large in this car, and actually it helps make the front end look sort of very in charge, gives it a good road presence that it wouldn't have if it had a smaller grille, but thankfully they have a very big one. Additionally, Mazda didn't just place its sensors sort of around the front end, kind of making it a bit busy, a bit ugly. What they did instead is they hid a bunch of sensors and radar components behind the actual emblem. So you'll see the emblem is flat and it's sort of a gloss finish, but that's because it's hiding things behind it, and as a result you don't need an extra little sensor bar or anything up front that kind of muddies up the design. If we look down the sides, we see that the CX-9 actually, its design lines make it look a little smaller than it is. At least to me, visually, in person, it looks a little smaller than its size actually is. Because remember, this is a full-size family SUV with 3 rows of space. But it doesn't look like that. Now, however, Mazda did do enough to differentiate it from the CX-5. So it's not like you're going to get something that looks like a CX-5, like a lower tier model. No. This definitely looks like the flagship, but it does carry over some Mazda design cues. It's just that they're executed in a good way. In terms of the rear end, I pretty much like everything there too. The rear hatch is nice. I feel like the rear bumper is nice. It's all nicely executed. The only thing I don't like are the rear taillights, because I feel they're slightly too small, which is interesting because in our CX-30 review, I said that they were slightly too big, but in this application, they're slightly too small. So kind of unusual, but again, minor details, because obviously nothing is perfect. So the good continues in the interior as well, because this is a place where the Mazda CX-9 absolutely excels. If you look around me, there's a bunch of colors, but they're done in such a subtle way that it comes off extremely elegant. For starters, the top of the dashboard has this black soft touch material. It's not leather, but it kind of looks like leather, but it feels okay. And most importantly, it looks nice. That's all that matters, because it's not like you're going to be touching the dashboard, but as long as it looks nice, it wins. So in this scenario, it does. And over here we have this gray plastic that surrounds the air vents, and that also has this sort of textured look, and I think it looks really nice. Then down here we have this sort of beige, almost gray plastic. Again, plastic, but there's a little bit of texture on it, and I think it looks very nice. If we look at the center console itself, this here on the sides and sort of wrapping around the controls is what looks to be almost brown wood, but again, plastic. But the thing here is that even though it is plastic, and you can tell that they're not like real leather or like, crazy high expensive materials, they're finished in such a way that they look much more expensive than they actually are. I also appreciate the fact that there are only 2 little rows of buttons here. Now, Mazda could have filled this thing with buttons, but instead they chose to keep the design nice and clean looking and put all the buttons right here, neatly placed. They're easy to use, easy to access, and you won't confuse them at all. A major highlight for me, for example, are the seats. These are some incredibly comfortable seats. I absolutely love these seats. They don't have aggressive bolstering because obviously it's not like a sporty SUV by any means, but you get this sort of diamond stitch kind of pattern in them. They do have a nice design. They're incredibly soft, and the leather quality of it actually feels nice. They're very soft to the touch, but they don't feel cheap in any way, and I feel like they perfectly elevate the cabin itself. And I also like the color. This sort of gray leather actually gives the cabin a whole lot of light, which means that even though the dash is black, the headliner is black, the seats being a light color allows a lot of light to come in here, and I love the way that it makes the cabin look, and above all else, how it makes the cabin feel. To finish up the cabin, we have Mazda's sort of semi-digital display. I say semi because there is a screen in the middle, but you still have sort of analog gauges on the side. Although when you do turn off the CX-9, it all looks like one black panel because there's nothing lit up, but the only really configurable screen is the one in the middle. Now, I will say that I kind of wish it was a fully digital display. We're seeing that in other competitors, and I really wish Mazda would implement that, but I'm absolutely not mad at this display. I feel like it fits everything here. It's very elegant. The numbers are printed, very clearly. There's no sort of extra flashiness to it. It's simple, it's elegant, and it works well. But I will say, I really hope the next generation has a fully digital display. We've also got this absolutely lovely screen up here because it's not only high quality, it's also extremely wide, which allows you to display a ton of media, especially like if you're in the maps. Here, let me show you. So if we go into maps, like Google Maps, for example, you can get such a wide view of maps that it actually helps you pinpoint exactly where you're going and actually makes following directions very, very easy. But I love the screen. The rotary controller here in the middle, I hate the fact that we have to use one because, I wish it could be touchscreen, but the screen is quite far away from the driver. But as controllers go, I really do prefer this Mazda rotary controller. I don't like the touchpad, I don't like the mouse, I don't like any of those, but this is about as good as it's gonna get if we're not gonna be using touch. But enough about the good, let's move on to the bad, because absolutely nothing is perfect and neither is the CX-9. And for me, personally, the biggest drawback is the 2.5 liter turbocharged engine that lives under the hood. Because although it does produce 250 horsepower, we have to keep in mind that the CX-9 weighs well over 4,000 pounds. And once you combine those two together, you get kind of a slow-moving SUV. Now, this same engine exists in the CX-5, and I've driven it there. I actually really liked it because 250 horsepower in a SUV that weighs sort of the mid to high 3,000 pound range is perfect because it's not that heavy. Now, once you add the extra weight in the CX-9, especially this CX-9 that has all-wheel drive, it has all the interior extras, we're tipping the scales pretty high for this kind of horsepower engine. And the result is that the CX-9 doesn't quite feel quick. It actually feels a little sluggish and a little sort of reluctant to get up to speed, but it's not a major deal. For me, the engine itself isn't the sort of main fault. It actually has to do with the transmission, because I feel like this 6-speed automatic transmission doesn't do enough of a good job to keep the engine in its sort of power band where it's developing most of its torque. When you do floor it, it doesn't seem to want to rev the engine high enough to develop, as much power as you would want. And that's something I saw also in the CX-30, where I felt like that engine ran out of juice, very quickly. This one has a little bit more torque to it. This one produces over 300 pound-feet of torque, which is, great. But the transmission itself doesn't really make the best use of it. So if you want to overtake or something, it's not that it's slow by any means, but it doesn't feel quite as quick as you would hope. Now, the chassis itself is actually very good. Like, the way the CX-9 handles is great, and that's something that I've noticed in all Mazdas. Like, for example, the CX-30, I really wish that had a more powerful engine because the chassis itself was great. It handled great, but it just didn't have enough oomph to sort of back up those capabilities. The CX-9, kind of a similar story, but this actually drives pretty nice, especially considering how tall and how large it is. I prefer this pretty much over everything else in the segment in terms of a driving experience. Not that you're gonna drive one of these to sort of for excitement, but if you are driving one of these every day, you're gonna notice those little bits where the actual handling is sharp, the suspension is nicely tuned. Also, in terms of refinement, this thing soaks up bumps pretty well. It's very comfortable and something that anybody would love to drive on a daily basis. If you've seen any of my other reviews, I often urge people not to buy the top trim level of whatever car they're looking at, largely because they're not usually worth the extra bucks. But in this scenario, it absolutely is. The CX-9 in this top trim level is absolutely worth every dollar. Now, I will say, you could easily go buy a German luxury SUV and pay, $70,000 for something equivalent to this, or you could have a CX-9 for $48,000 fully loaded out the door, and then you'll be equally as happy. So there we have it, the 2021 Mazda CX-9. Once we combine how good it looks, how great the interior is, and how overall refined it is, it's no secret why it's one of my favorite SUVs. And this is one I'm definitely going to miss giving back. But all good things must come to an end. But you don't have to. You can actually go and buy one of these, and I highly, highly recommend that you do. And with that, I want to thank you so much for watching the video. I want to make sure you guys like it, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.